Hello and welcome to Game Design Hour, the podcast where I interview the people who create the video games you know and love. I'm your host, Miles Goldsmith, and on today's episode, I sat down with three of the people who created the video game Traffic Jams. Traffic Jams is a fun VR game where you control traffic and try to keep crashes from happening. Let's meet our guests and get into the interview.
I'm Yannis. I'm the CEO of the Chicken Game Company. It's also the creative director on Traffic Jams.
My name is Joran. I'm one of the developers of Traffic Jams. Been there from the very first prototype up until almost the end. Did a lot of game design and also did the voice of Dennis, the character that bugs you constantly.
And I'm Dominic. I'm a developer at Little Chicken. One of my first projects at Chicken with Traffic Jams. So been there for almost the whole duration of the project. Worked on mostly just various gameplay stuff.
So what was the first thing that really sparked each of your interest in creating video games?
I guess I'll go first. The reason I'm into this industry right now is, for me personally, it's a perfect blend of technical stuff and a lot of creativity. I tend to see myself as somebody who does a lot of things at the same time, not really super specialized in one subject. And working in games really gives me the opportunity to find my creative spark, but also using the technical skills I have as a programmer that suit me, basically. Not sure what made me get into video games. I do remember me toying around with some weird stuff on the computer called Multimedia Builder. And that was a program that you could use to create interactive programs, basically like PowerPoint, but then just as a program instead of a presentation. You could trigger MP3s and animations, that kind of stuff. And I was amazed that that program could like spit out an executable. Up at that point, I was only familiar with images and PowerPoint presentations, but I could actually make executables. Like the file extension was .exe, and I was like, oh, I can do this now. So I started creating these weird things like games. I did it completely wrong, but that got me into the idea of doing this more often. And then the Flash games era came, and I just continued doing this. And I've never stopped building games that way, and now I'm here, I think about 15-20 years later, still doing these things.
Well, my first experience was a little later than Flash. I'm not that old.
Nice.
I started in high school. There was this one big end of year project where we basically had to research a subject of our own choice. And since I'm a fairly big gamer, I decided to research how to actually make video games. So back then, I started toying around with the Unity game engine, which was basically my first introduction into video games, actually creating video games. So that's what I did in the end of high school. And that basically sparked my first interest in the creation. And that eventually led to like me deciding to go and study video game development at college, which then eventually led to me landing a job at Chicken, where I'm right now.
For me, it goes back even further since I'm the oldest one here. I always remembered in the early days playing games on a Commodore 64. I was always intrigued with that. Never much of a programmer, so I was mostly drawing and doing these things. But I really was sort of inspired by being able to bring like these thoughts or these drawings to life and have people play around with it. Basically always thought, okay, the coolest thing to do would be to actually make these games and have all these worlds that I draw on paper come to life and have people experience them, basically. So that's what I started doing, and went to a school that was sort of game design-ish. Wasn't really game design because it wasn't really a school for that back then, at least not in the Netherlands. And then did that, and in the final year met up with a bunch of enthusiasts who also wanted to make games. And we made some games as a final project, and it was so cool. And then we started the company pretty much. And here we are.
How did the idea for Traffic Jams originate?
So a few years back, we had like a company retreat. We went with the whole company, I think about 20-something people, rented this big house somewhere in the woods in the Netherlands. Just to hang out for a few days and think about new game ideas. And one of our colleagues always noticed that the construction workers near our office would always have like this when they were working on the street, would have like the guy there who was sort of directing traffic around all the things. And he was just there waving and pointing at people. And when we were discussing some ideas, and like we had various groups discussing different game concepts, he said like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool in VR to just have like, to just be in the middle of traffic and just point and wave at people and they would follow your orders. And we're like, wow, that sounds really cool. And basically based off that, the simple thought, basically we started just making a prototype. And the prototype was really basic, but once we made a prototype and it was a lot of fun to do, people were yelling and screaming at these really simple models that weren't there. They weren't even animated, but just deposed characters going back and forth and crashing into cars, of course. And yeah, people were yelling at them. And we thought like, oh, this is really cool. We should make this into a full game.
What pieces of media were some of the biggest inspirations for the game?
We have a pretty diverse group of people working on it, and they all had like a lot of pop culture references that we wanted to work in there. And basically we started thinking what is cool to experience from a first person point of view if you're in VR. So the Godzilla came in really, the Godzilla feet that sort of stomps down and you was like, okay, we really need to do that because it's going to be cool in VR. I don't know who came up with the comments that sort of would rain down on you. That was something like, yeah, that sounds cool, let's do that. And basically we started to just try to think of crazy things that would happen in traffic because, yeah, traffic directing in itself isn't really the most exciting thing. I mean, it's a basic, some sort of basic thing you do. But yeah, we sort of wanted to spice it up with crazy things. Yeah, so from all over the place, basically.
Pretty much every game has fun or interesting ideas that didn't make the cut for the game and ended up getting removed. What are some of your favorite things you find interesting that got cut from the game?
Yeah, there's one that comes to mind. I've seen sketches of more extreme environments than big cities. So to make sure that everything stayed in scope, we went with a few big cities that are very recognizable. But there was actually some concept art done with you standing in a rubber boat and giant boats passing by. There's even one where you would float in space and spaceships would come from like all directions, not just at an intersection, but places all around you. I've had a friend who is a pilot, and he said you should have like the guy with the colored lights at the airport and just have giant airplanes pass by and maybe a small airplane and then one of those baggage carts. I think there's still a lot of cool stuff gameplay wise that we could do with that, but yeah, that would make the project grow immensely. There's still a lot of environments and cities that we wanna visit.
Yeah, and I think that also sort of ties into your earlier question, like the space thing, for example, was really inspired by this Back to the Future scene where you have like these cars driving in the air, basically. And we thought that would be really cool. But yeah, at one point you just have to say, okay, this is the content that we have to go for and sort of make it work and not come up with new ideas. I think we actively said at one point, okay, let's just stop coming up with new ideas, otherwise we're never going to finish it, which is always a bit of a shame. But yeah, at some point you just have to get practical, I guess.
So while working on some of the different locations, did you do any sort of research into the major cities that you were recreating?
Oh, definitely. We've got concept artists taking a look at every angle of these famous landmarks. It's not just the layout of the roads that's very important. I mean, the one in Tokyo is, I'm not quite sure what it's called, but it's super famous for that giant intersection with the crosswalks. Everybody knows the crosswalks, but then it's also important to take a look at what the environment is like. How do the skyscrapers look? There's all these intricate details in these cities that make it stand out as such a very recognizable city. We try to do that even with our own home places like Gouda and Amsterdam, both Dutch cities, and they feature some likeness, but the vibe and the little details in there are very cool to find. Like the bell the tram uses when it passes. That's just a typical thing that you will hear a lot in Amsterdam. So yeah, we've done a pretty deep dive in all these cities and tried to get a true feel of what it's like to be there.
What was the process for creating and designing each of the levels?
Besides the research, of course, to the cities and seeing how busy they are and stuff like that, we created this main level design tool, which we used in all of our levels. It was basically a custom editor where we could script the whole duration of a level and at which points a certain pedestrian spawns and at which point a certain event happens. So instead of having a fully randomized level, we could basically script out our own custom levels, which helped immensely in creating various levels and various difficulties of levels also. I guess that's the main point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also in terms of gameplay, we were looking for something that starts simple and as you progress becomes more impressive and more busy, basically. So we took a little town in Netherlands as the inspiration for the first level, with just one quiet street. And then you move on to a bigger city and eventually end up in New York, pretty much on Times Square, or our version of it at least, in which traffic comes from all sides and you're pretty much overwhelmed. Yeah, and I guess it was also a challenge because the really clear crossroads are good for people when they just roll into it. But when you get into the really busy intersection, there's so much going on. And yeah, it was also for us a struggle to make sure that the game system still held up. I mean, if you have 5 lanes of cars and you have to point to one specific lane, it becomes tougher if they're farther away because they're smaller and stuff like that. But yeah, that was fun to manage.
How long did each of you end up spending working on the game?
I think it's been 2.5 years, I think, for me. Something like that. I think I've been there for... I mean, to be fair, the process of the game has been on and off. So we did a demo, then it got put away for a little while, and then it got picked up again. The team grew and shrunk depending on what was needed. But I'm not sure what the total running time was. Jonas, you might have to remind me, but I think I've done like 2.5 years of working on this.
Yeah, I think so. In general, the time that spent working on it, but like you said, also with some breaks in between. Yeah, also was pretty much there from the beginning till the end. I think you and I have been probably on it the longest from the team there, yeah, something like that. But I think if you compress it into a single period, at least in my memory, it's like closer to 1.5 years and maybe closer to 2 years in total, but not all time full powered. Yeah. I don't know how long you have been on it, Dominic.
I wasn't there for the initial prototyping period, so I joined a little after that. I'm not sure how long that exactly was, but once pre-production started, I joined the project and basically stayed on it, I think full-time until the very end. So after the initial release on Quest and Steam, there was another period where we focused on getting the game to PlayStation. Is also a period I worked on. So I think that also brings it to 2.5, a little more, maybe years.
Each round of traffic jams is on a timer, and when putting a player on a timer, it's important to make sure that the player is still able to complete their task within the time limit, but that they are also challenged by the limit. How did you work to balance out the amount of time players would have for each round?
Short answer, a lot of playtesting. There's 10 missions in each level. And yeah, it basically comes down to playing a level over and over and over again and seeing what the scores are, which you get. Also letting new players, of course, playtest your game. That's very important. We had these moments where we invited random people to our office and let them playtest our game, just to see how they will do and what their scores are in the levels, which basically defined a baseline in every level. And we balance our scores and our challenges in each level around that. I think that's the most important point of keeping it fun and playable for everyone, because we play tested our own levels so much that we became pretty damn good at our own game. So our scores would just get higher and higher. So getting new people to play our game was one of the most important things.
What was the process for playtesting, and what important things did you learn during the playtesting process?
Can I hook up on this? Because there's one special thing that I really loved about this project. So there were two forms of playtesting. One was with the colleagues, just when we were doing stuff together, and one was with the players. But the thing that I liked most about doing this with colleagues is that every single playtest, people would be talking to each other, not about other stuff, but about cool ideas that we had. It wouldn't matter who was playing or what level was played. Somebody was always like, oh, maybe if we add this little thing or that little thing. For me, this was one of the first projects. I'm not saying that I did horrible projects, but for me, this was one of the projects where it felt that it didn't matter when we would jump in, there was always inspiration and fun to be found. I've built games where there were moments that were like, okay, guess we're doing this level again, a little bit bored of what we were building. Here, this was a totally different story. Then the moment we started playing with people outside the office, that's always a moment where you are blown away about the feedback. Things that seem so obvious to you could be completely vague to someone else. Those moments are also a giant eye opener, and I cannot stress enough how important it is to test with people who didn't build the game because they will tell you things that you didn't even think about, and they will see things and bring things to mind that can improve your game so much. So and that's basically just putting on a headset, letting them play and let them talk. Don't ask closed questions like, do you like the game? Or do you think the game should be faster or something like that? But let them do the talking. And if they stop talking, then start asking open questions. Like, is there anything you would like to see changed? Is there anything you like to see improved? And most of the times it's like, yeah, how do I get that car? and then we were like, well, you might want to try pointing and waving, and then it's always a nice balance of weird comments and very insightful things people will start shouting when playing your game.
Managing scope is a really important part of developing games. How did you work to manage the scope of traffic jams while working on it?
Yeah, like I said, at one point you just have to stop saying, okay, I have an idea. We had a product owner who ran the process pretty much. And as I was sort of in the role of creative director, I was like constantly going, let's add this, let's add that. And he would just be like, yeah, that's great. We're going to add it to the backlog. It was his nice way of saying, okay, we're not going to do that right now, at least. But yeah, at one point he also said, yeah, you just have to stop it. We set like the amount of levels that we wanted to have, which was 5 cities, and decided on having different times of day to increase sort of the reuse of those levels. So we settled on that. We had like an idea in mind for the amounts of missions you got during a level. So once we decided that, it was pretty much, we mapped it out and said, okay, this is going to be it. There was one odd thing out. I don't know if you made it to the final dance-off in the end. I think that's one of the most fun parts of the game. And that was like the last thing I think we did almost at the end as well. And then we had like the whole thing, and then once we defined the scope, somewhere along the way, the publisher said, how about some multiplayer? And we're like, okay,
yeah, the multiplayer.
That was not really, hasn't been part of the original idea. So we were like breaking our heads on how to do this. And we sort of decided on a mobile add-on type of gameplay where players can join in and have cars. We struggled quite a bit with that. And then we had another request, which was like, okay, guys, it's great, but Quest is actually the biggest platform. So can you port it to Quest? Because we were mostly making for PC, which is nice, but the PC is like a beast with all the video cards in there that you need, all the power that you need. And then you sort of have to port it to a mobile phone. And we were like, okay, great. That took us quite some time as well. So yeah, even though the scope was not even that big, I think if it would have just come out on PC, we would have been done like maybe within the year. But adding those two things on really lengthened the whole development period. And yeah, that was something initially we didn't count on, especially the let's say the optimizing for Quest part took us really long, and also the back and forth with multiplayer and trying to make it fun. Trying, because I still think it's not really the most fun part of the game, to be honest.
How large was the team that created this game?
I mean, we started out with 2, and then it grew to, I think, 10, 15, and then it grew to 1, Dominic.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I meant earlier. There's been this, and every project we do has this. It's there's not a fixed team size that we put on a project. When you want to make sure that something works, you just need, I don't know, 2 programmers maybe to talk to each other, implement a prototype, see if it's fun. And once it starts rolling, then you start adding more programmers, artists, concept artists, animation. And then when you've got like a nice vertical slice of what the game should look like, it's mostly production. Then you stop adding features, which we didn't because we like adding features, but you should stop adding big features and basically work towards getting all the content in. And yeah, it really depends what's needed at that point. I do think the largest was 10 or something. I'm 10 people, but I might be slightly wrong.
Yeah, I think at its height it was definitely more. I think it was pretty much everyone except the Rescue Wings team, which at that point was like 3 or 4 people. So yeah, I think 15 is probably closer. But yeah, we didn't keep an exact track, and for the credits, we include all chickens because everyone at one point helped out and jumped in. So yeah, it sort of ebbs and flows, as you explained.
In a few of the levels, the player is able to stop things that normally a person wouldn't be able to stop, such as the meteor in New York. Were there any other interesting ideas like that you didn't end up adding? And how did you come up with these sort of ideas?
That's a tough one. I don't remember any giant weird things. I mean,
no, we didn't do.
Oh yeah, well there's one but that just turned out not to be fun. One of the things that we initially thought of was having an ambulance or a police car. Those usually won't stop for traffic lights when they are coming at you with sirens. I think the tram in Amsterdam is sort of like that, but it's way slower because it's just a big massive machine. But in the early days, we had like a car with flashing lights that would just ignore you. It just wasn't fun because you couldn't do anything, and it just caused you to get a lot of crashes. Not in like the game crashed, but car crashes. Yeah, that's something we stripped out because it wasn't really working.
Yeah, another things which you sort of optimize along the way. I'm just going over some old concept art to see what we have there. I mean, we had a lot of plans for different types of vehicles, like you already mentioned. At one point, we also wanted to have like a group of tourists that with their cameras would keep going. We had like we wanted to have a cat in there that also didn't listen to you. We actually wanted at one point to have a seal in there, I believe. And then we changed it into a guy with a seal head because that was easier to do somehow. We also tried to figure out ways to sort of help people in the busy times. Like we came up with this sort of this wavy blow up doll kind of thing that you would throw and then it would stop traffic. But yeah, we didn't even prototype because it was so far off the whole thing. Yeah, a lot of crazy ideas just came by and were shut down as well. And usually we would sit down and if we would sort of be able to discuss and think if it sounded like fun and also it sounded like something people would just get without too much explanation, then we would prototype it and then do it. And otherwise it would just fall off the whole thing to do.
Which parts of the game did each of you have to put the most time and effort into to get just the way you wanted it?
Yeah, I think I got one. You might think that the use of these triggers and these controllers is very straightforward. However, when it comes to recognizing what a player wants to do versus what we programmed, what we're trying to detect can vary a lot. Like a player can start waving frantically with their controller, trying to make a passenger go, and all we see in the code is weird movements. Like we had moments that we had to tell testers, like, no, really try to move your arm up and down to your face, and they were just waving around frantically, or they would point to someone and then start waving with the same hand. And another super weird one that I would think should be very simple, throwing stuff. Things in VR don't have weight to them. So if you grab something like, I don't know, the fish or the sausage or anything, and you throw it, you don't have a sense of how fast you're throwing. Add to that the fact that you sometimes have to throw it very far or very close or very precise, and it would go all over the place. I would have implemented a version of the hands where you could throw things, and then one of my colleagues said, like, what did you do? I can't hit anything. And then they would do a version, and then I would say, what's going on? I can't hit anything. And that would go back and forth. I think that the throwing is one of the features that kept coming back in issues like, wait, why isn't this working? I thought this worked. It's such a small, trivial thing that turned out to take a bit more time than expected. Not sure if Dominic has any other gameplay features that come to mind.
Well, the one thing that felt the longest is not really a gameplay feature, but that's the release on PlayStation.
Okay.
That's the thing where I mostly worked solo on, which was basically just a long list provided by PlayStation, which had a bunch of store requirements, which you need to have in your game to be able to release on PlayStation. But the actual gameplay feature that took the longest, I think, was the balancing of the levels and making the flow of the levels just right, because every time we added a new challenge or a new gameplay feature, we had to incorporate that into the existing levels. So that was a part of the game which I always had to work on. We always went back there and adjusted previous gameplay mechanics just because we made something new. So I think that's for me the one part of the game I worked the longest on.
Yeah, for me personally, the thing I worked on, mostly in the beginning, it was mostly doing all different art stuff, as I did a lot of sketches for the characters, the situations, and some environments, but that was mostly done by Brenda, our concept artist. After that was mostly covered, I think, most part of my day was filled with, okay, we've just added this to the game, now go play. I was pretty much constantly playing the game back and forth and could dream all the levels at one point. And also trying to, I think, like, I don't know who mentioned it earlier, trying to find the right balance, because at that point we were like experts, and every once in a while we just had to find a fresh person and say, okay, go try. And then you're like, oh my God, it's really too difficult. Well, for us, it was like a walk in the park to get all the levels cleared and get all the missions done. So yeah, I think the actual play testing and playing again, for me, was in the end the thing I spent most time on. And funny part is, up until the end, and I still enjoy it now to just put it on and go through all the levels.
Are there any fun Easter eggs that you've added into the game, and have you seen many players find them?
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of small chickens spread across the
What we usually do,
map.
Yeah, what we usually do, we have the little chicken as a logo, and I think at one point it was a 3D model, and yeah, artists as they go along tend to hide these in places that you don't expect. So I'm not sure if people actually went actively looking for them though. And a lot of things that are maybe not necessarily Easter eggs, but more like the little details that we put in, like references to movies and other pop culture stuff, and things like posters or stores or vehicles that you would see drive around. We had a lot of fun with that. I guess you could call those Easter eggs.
I mean, they are pretty out there and obvious, but we've got references to our other games. There's a car from Wrecked. There's a fire extinguish mission that's a direct reference to Rescue Wings. And yeah, there's plenty of it. And I mean, in the start cabin, like in the little trailer, if you take a look around, you see the posters of basically Fast and the Furious, but it's called different, and all those little things. But they're pretty much out there. But it's so much fun. Oh, brand names. I think what was the name of the butcher? There was like a vegan butcher called. I'm not sure, but if you look at the ads and the advertisements on the boards, there's just weird stuff in hidden in names. There's a jeweler, a jewel store that's called Terrific Gems, which is basically just traffic jams, and it's things like that we mentioned these on our channels in the office, and we're like terrific gems, and then you type that in, and then you hear somebody laughing at the other side of the room, and you're like, all right, that's gonna go in. You know, it's small stuff like that. Yeah,
I think a lot of fun went into the details. There's actually some Easter eggs that because we know them so well, don't even consider Easter eggs anymore. But there was like this a sort of mini game if you're in the central hub. We called it the little room. If you start throwing stuff in the trash can, at one point it would count the things, I believe, it would count the scores. And so that was like fun basketball type of, because we noticed it was just fun. Most people, if you give them the game, they just start fooling around in the cabin and don't even realize there's a whole game that they can actually play. So we had some fun with that. And things like if you pick up the phone, or you can hear Dennis talking to you and stuff like that. Because people will put the phone to their ears because it's VR and that's what they do. Those things were fun to that.
Can fans of the game expect to see more content in the future?
Yeah, actually we're hooked up and up because we noticed some of the specific throwing parts or mini games need a bit of introduction, and we put that in the form of tutorial where you sort of get some extra lessons from Dennis, your instructor, where he tells you, okay, in case of this mini game, you have to shoot fireballs, or for this mini game, you have to throw the fish. And there was another one, which was also, I guess, something we noticed people struggle with a bit more than we expected. It's like just a small tutorial where you would learn to time the different speeds of the car. So first you would have to do like a car hit a pedestrian, and then a bus hit a fast car, so you sort of would get a bit more of the feeling of the timing. And pretty much with the throwing tutorials, we sort of made that into a mini game as well. So you could just also do high scores for that. I mean, there's still not enough idea for new levels, but we've also been busy with other projects. So I'm not sure if we would add new levels really soon, but it seemed fun at one point at least.
What was the biggest lesson that each of you learned while working on this game?
Jonas, you can go first. I need to think.
Okay, I'll go first. Biggest lesson. Well, ideally, that beforehand, if you jump into production, that you know a bit more about the platforms that you're heading towards. Like I said, adding the quest to it was really a big chunk of work that took us a long time to optimize. Like I said, going from PC to mobile phone while maintaining a sort of graphic fidelity was quite a big extra workload that we sort of underestimated. And probably another lesson, but that's, I guess, always the thing with playing. Make sure you have players. By players, I don't mean the dev team, have actual people play the game a lot. So you're sure that, whatever you're doing isn't too hard or that they get what you're doing. And that's an ongoing thing because, when you're making games, you tend to sort of get blindsided. That you basically don't see the things that people don't get because, you know everything so well. That's always ongoing, I guess. And also, maybe one more then. One really important thing is that I think we also found out how fun it was to just work on a game that's all of it is coming from your own crazy ideas pretty much, because we've been doing a lot of work for hire for a lot of time before that. And this was sort of like us letting go of the reins and saying, okay, whatever we come up with, we're going to do if it's fun enough according to us. And that was a really fun process with all of us.
Yeah, for me, I'm thinking a bit, this wasn't my first VR game I did. However, this was one of the first ones where I truly found how users interact in this virtual world and how that has a lot of things in common with what you do in reality, but also a lot of things that people just don't understand or are completely missing the point. This comes down to how would you select a level? We chose the folders because that's something that we felt would work. But then you come at these weird issues that you have to grab the folder. How do you do that? Well, you point at it and then it flies to your hand, and all these weird little interaction things that should make a lot of sense in a old school classic game suddenly are completely different and have a completely different need of interaction in VR.
Maybe if I can quickly add to that.
Sure.
With the folders, the thing that still surprises me is that people sort of struggle with. When you grab the folder, you have to sort of use your virtual finger to press the start button. And when you say, okay, press the start button, for us, it feels like, okay, just use your finger, right? And people start pressing buttons on the controller. And for us, that was like a given, but that's really something people would have to grasp because they were in VR and it was their virtual plan that they were using all of a sudden.
For me, the most important takeaway as a programmer was how to structure projects. Since it was one of my first ever projects in a real game company, I learned a lot of things about making video games. And also because Traffic Jams was originally built on top of a game jam code base, that brought us a couple of challenges in the end, especially because we wanted to add multiplayer and port it to Quest. Yeah, that's a big lesson to take with us to newer projects. And I think we're definitely doing that already in our current projects. But I guess that works for every game you make. There's always these technical difficulties and solutions you make for those which you take with you to the new projects. So that's for me the most important takeaway, I guess.
Yeah, we've really learned to stop after prototyping, scratch everything and do it again, but this time neatly and structured. That's something we really should do more often. Well, we are doing that actually. We've had a couple of projects starting and basically just first figure out if it's fun. And if you know that, then you can start working on the actual product. That's two vastly different things that we need to keep in mind.
Looking back now, is there anything that you wish you could have done differently before the launch of the game?
These are tough questions. I mean, I would have loved to just add more. I still feel like there's enough inspiration to keep going with crazy stuff. I did notice, however, that a lot of the extra fun stuff was in the missions. Guiding traffic only brings you so far, but it's those things that really set this game apart from others. I wanted to do more with music as well. There's a few very well themed songs, but others could have gotten better fit. There's all these things where me as a developer looks at it and it's like, oh, I wish I could have done that. However, I don't even think players will notice that it's not the way we intended.
Yeah, I guess also I was just thinking back about your earlier question. Definitely another Easter egg is you starring as a J-pop musician.
Well, the Tokyo theme was I didn't want to segue into that, but yeah, I've written I've written the Tokyo theme as a composer, and I really felt like the other levels deserved something like that as well. but we didn't have the time, so we went with pre-produced tracks that we acquired somewhere. But if you take a, I mean, talking about Easter egg, the Tokyo track is sung by a Vocaloid, which is a robot. And it's super badly translated from English to Japanese, and basically it's about somebody driving in a car and seeing somebody on the road waving frantically and not knowing what to do. So it's just a super silly song about traffic jams, and
we should actually have put the lyrics somewhere as an Easter egg for people to. That was really funny.
I've spent basically a day trying to match Japanese syllables that probably aren't even correct to the beat. There's silly stuff like it's just singing like konnichiwa, like it's super simple. I was actually a bit afraid that I did something stupid in translation and written something very offensive without even knowing it. But we had fun writing it, and why not, right?
Yeah, I think from a project point of view, project organizational point of view, if we would have known from the start that it would have been on different platforms, we would have set it up differently, I guess, instead of going to downgrade it pretty much after the fact. Part of it, I definitely agree with Joran. If we would have known that ahead of time, we would probably also have more room for more content. And I guess the things that I look for but never made it into the game were the things that Joran mentioned, like, I don't know, being on the sea with giant ships, directing traffic there, being in space, or an airport. I mean, at one point we also had an idea, maybe it's cool if you're on a racetrack and these really fast cars come by as a really difficult level. But yeah, we never got to do those things, which would probably be fun, or maybe not. We would never know. But yeah, having a bit more of a plan instead of having to sort of make the game fit on a different platform afterwards would have given us more space to make it cool, I guess.
Yeah, I think Joran said it perfectly. I would have loved to see the space levels or the one on the sea. But one change that didn't make it into the game, which I would have loved to see, was the more organic traffic. We had this idea where pedestrians would walk across each other and more into groups, and have like separate lanes where they could walk next to each other. Because right now they are basically walking into in a straight line. So that's a big change I would have loved to see in the game, which would change the feel of the levels a lot, I think.
Yeah,
that's what traffic jams do.
Yeah, exactly. No, that would definitely be interesting. I think it would have more chaos, but it would also be more natural. I think we would have had a lot of fun with it. Also, probably more nightmares, because that would be way harder to manage from a game design point of view. But sounded like fun.
What would be your biggest piece of advice to a newer game dev trying to go and create their first game?
Maybe not do your first game in VR. Not because it's not fun, because in terms of accessibility, it's still really a small audience that can do it. And while you can have a really great experience, there's so much other things you have to take in mind for your first game, like the controls are very different. Also, the things you have to keep in mind to make sure that people don't get lost in their headset, so to say, because it can be really overwhelming. And at the same time, I think, especially for VR, really look at something that offers people a reason to be in VR, basically. That's what I liked about Traffic Jam. It really fit for VR because, the signaling was straightforward, and looking around and directing traffic because of that felt really natural.
Mine would be really depending on what you want to achieve with your game. So if you're just going out there and making a game in your spare time, then I'd say do whatever your heart desires. I think games that come from your own personal creativity are generally the best. I really believe in motivation that comes from the heart. However, if you want to make money with your game, and that's a completely different style of thinking about it, then know your market, know what's your competition, know how to put it on the market. Don't expect to make a game, put it somewhere in the store, and automatically make a lot of money. The only stories you hear about doing that were lucky. You need a bit of luck, but it's also really knowing how to market yourself and network to get to the right people. But still, first and foremost, I think you should make games that you love making, because if you're making something you don't like, then it's not getting anywhere. stay true to what you want to make.
Agree with that. I guess my 2 words would be start small, and especially just go for it. Nowadays, you can just pick an engine, whether it's Game Maker or Unity or Unreal. Just think of a simple concept and try and make that. Anything you don't know, you can just Google. There's so many resources nowadays. You can just basically Google your question and get 10 different answers on how to solve your problem and basically work your way through your game and build your skills that way. Just go for it, I guess. It's as simple as that.
What's next for all of you? What are you working on now?
I don't know how much we're allowed to say.
We've got an Instagram of the current project. It's quite out there.
We have some projects in the works. One of them is sort of live sim game. It doesn't have a specific title yet, but call it Project Vampire. It's a vampire themed live sim in the vein of Stardew and Animal Crossing. We've also been working for quite some time on a racer called Blitz GT, which is not out in full public yet, but there's some stuff you can see of it on our website. In between that and Traffic Jams, we also worked on a mobile game called Birthplace, which we're still testing. Yeah, we've been keeping busy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for your time. It's been great interviewing you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your time. Great questions as well.
And that's how the interview went down. I want to thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, make sure to follow, subscribe. It's different on every platform. Also, if you don't want to miss another episode, make sure to hit that notifications button so you get notified whenever a new episode goes out. If you have a friend who you think might enjoy the show, make sure to share it with them. Also, consider leaving us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you want to stay up to date with what's going on with Game Design Hour, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok at Game Design Hour. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I can see you next time.